Thanks for all that have joined. Kind of again, housekeeping here. We are going to record this, and we'll be able to get this back out probably within the next 3 to 5 days. I do want to make sure that I kind of talk a little bit about kind of what we're going to do today, and then kind of introduce some of these questions that have kind of been sent in prior. We're going to get a chance to answer most, if not all of them. Again, kind of it's time dependent. Thanks for spending the next 45 minutes with us today. So we'll fire things up. Today, the webinar, the meeting, kind of the theme is really balanced energy and how do we build yield with balanced energy. And I'm honored today to be here today with Darin Moon, the founder and CEO of Redox Bio-Nutrients. Darin, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Chad. This is a privilege to be able to talk about this stuff and just be on the line with you and Amy. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Man, I tell you what, you were just talking about weather changing. We're almost 70 degrees here in Omaha, or just outside of Omaha. The weather's changing, but guess what? Folks are getting ready to get something put in the ground. It's right around the corner.
Yeah, we're even here in the West, we're kind of in the same boat. And yeah, you don't want to get too ahead of yourself, but it's kind of hard not to when it's that warm outside and things look like they're starting to move. It's kind of hard not to want to go get in a tractor and start moving.
100%. And that's, I think when you start preparing for the season like we are, we've been doing that for quite some time, right? But you're going to hear us today talk a little bit about tree nut fruit. You're going to hear us talk about veggies. You're going to hear us talk about corn, soybeans, and wheat. And when I say that, it may not specifically be about a crop, but I'm going to talk about the foundations of the technology behind what Redox Bio-Nutrients is doing. And Darin, I'm, again, excited to be able to kind of talk to you about how we can balance energy and build yield through plant charge balance. But before we get started, I want to dig into the nuts and bolts of how you got started as a company. You mind?
Yeah, we can go there. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
It's to me one of the best stories in ag, right? It's fun, it's exciting, and it's not too different. As we start looking at us as producers, we have our family business, and how do you pass it to the next generation? Obviously, you got to have a good foundation of the core business before you can do that. So let's get fired up.
Thanks, Chad. I don't want to talk too much about myself, but the older I get, the more unique I realize that my story is. And it was an idea that I really believed in, to be honest with you. But it was an idea that it took a lot of effort on a lot of people's part. This little photo here is taken by my wife, and she's actually, if the photo was taken by someone else, she'd be in there too, working. And this is our first product mixing way back when, one of the first products I invented and had a patent on. And as you can see, it's not a big warehouse. It was done out of the small garage that the house that we were renting. That's not my house. That's a rental house. Okay. We were taking every spare dime we had to put it into being able to push our ideas out and get people to try them. And besides that, do the science behind them. We were heavy into research from day one, not just pushing products, but pushing products that were backed by research. So that's my son in the front and my daughter in the back and me in the very back. I actually do know how to work up a sweat. So yeah.
Well, I can't see for certain, but I think that's a pink tricycle and maybe a mermaid shirt. Is that Colton?
That is Colton with the mermaid shirt on. That was way back in the day when that was popular. So yeah, he's kind of embarrassed about that, but it's a family deal. From the beginning, it was a family deal. Yeah.
Well, and Darin, this is why I love the story, right? It's relatable. And, at the end of the day, we had to get by with what we had to at the time to be able to make things go, right? And I think from a producer level on our farm, same thing, right? I grew up, our farm was, in the 80s, we went through that, right? I think I had one pair of kangaroo shoes that Velcroed, in those times. So you did what you had to do. But I love the fact, and it says humble beginnings here, but it's still to this day, it's one of the best kept secrets in ag. And I think the humility and the way we go about ourselves in the marketplace it's the foundation that you started here.
Well, Chad, and I appreciate that. Just real quickly, it does go back to that, to your point. I was raised on a small family farm. I had to get up before school to change the water. I had to get up before school and cultivate. And when football practice was over, I had to go home and sit on a tractor. I knew what that was all about, and that has carried through yet today. The work ethic that my father taught me and instilled in me carries through today, but not just the work ethic, the appreciation for what it takes to do things right. I think that's the foundation. One of the founding principles of Redox is there's no cutting corners. There's no pretending. There's no hoping. There is, we're going to do things right and see things that are based and founded in science, and then pushed and promoted through proper channels. And that's who we are. That's who we are.
Yeah. I love that foundation. And that's kind of where we met almost 2.5 years ago when we started talking. One of the best kept secrets in ag, but I think the foundation of the business. And if you start looking at this too, I don't think the first part of what you created, even after that garage, was done by commercial operators. This is you learning how to build stuff too. So
believe it or not, I can swing a hammer. I'm not real good at being overly accurate with measurements, so I'm a rough contractor, not a finished contractor. Okay. But
well,
yeah, I mean, I had to save where I could save, so
yeah.
I'm putting up the lumber. I'm digging the foundation. And I, again, the meaningful part of this photo isn't me. It's the fact that my kids' heart have been in this because they were part of the blood, sweat, and tears, and they just watched the whole thing grow as a family together. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you look at what it is today, it's really built on certainly family, but it's also built on customer, right? Customer retention. It's also built on customer commitment in terms of, basically if a product works, customers vote with their dollars. And so this is, the building you see today and some of the success that you've had as an individual business owner is because of the way we treat customers and the way products perform.
Chad, people and relationships are the most important thing that I've ever done, that we do as a company. Is I love this industry. Like I said, I was born and raised in it. It's all I've ever known, is growing crops and understanding and learning about crops. So it's personal. It's not just a job. It's not just a way to make money. It's personal. And I truly, passionately believe that what we're doing is integral to the changes that are necessary for agriculture to continue to be profitable for growers. We can't keep doing the things the way we did in the 70s and 80s. That was good for the 70s and 80s. That's not necessarily sustainable for today. And so it's personal with me, and the privilege for me is the people I get to meet, but also the people that work in the company. I'm no longer the smartest guy in the company. I'm probably the least smart guy in the company, and that's a privilege, Chad. That's a privilege to have people like you and Amy and Dr. Giff and Dr. Doss, my two boys. I could go down the list. Everyone in the company is highly qualified, highly professional. It's a privilege, Chad. It's a privilege.
Speaking of blood, sweat, and tears, right? You're kind of all in. We've talked about that, from time to time at our meetings. And you talk about growers, right? They're all in. This is everything they know. This is their family heritage legacy. And I think if you go to the next slide, this is what it's about, right? It is about the generational approach of how do you take what you, Darin, have created as a business and that blood, sweat, and tears that you've put into it. And you look at the guys to your side. I'm going to leave them off to the side for a minute. What about the one next to you there? Val, the matriarch of the family. Couldn't be done without her, right? You mentioned
Yeah, I'll tell you what, you can tell I'm a lucky guy because I married well above myself. One of the most common comments I get is, what is such a beautiful girl like that doing with such an ugly mutt like you? And there's a lot of truth to that, okay? But while I was out building the business, she kept my family together, because not having a family was never an option for me. Having a business and not having a family was never, those two never could not be together. So the fact that she was willing to be all in on her end and keep the family together and run my two boys to baseball practice and football practice and my daughters to dance and cheer and all the things that it takes to run five kids while I'm growing this business, and she never once complained. That's part of the reason why we're successful, for sure.
Well, and I think that to me, again, you talk about the ability to be humble, right? But being able to actually put your blood, sweat, and tears into things and take risks. Talk about taking risks. As producers, we take risks every day. But I knew when you went all in, right, 30 some odd years ago, it had to work.
Chad, there was no second job. I didn't have a nighttime job. It either worked or it didn't. And I'm very blessed that it worked, that the ideas that we had and some of the patents that we have are very functional and very scientific in nature, and they performed very well. But there's no second job. My wife and I were all in, and when it came time to when there wasn't enough money, my famous line is, I asked her to pour more water in the soup so it'd go farther. That's how we survived, and that's
Sure.
real. That's very real in the early days. So we're very blessed. We're very blessed.
Speaking of all in, Darin, I hate to admit it, but you're kind of a hood ornament anymore. The guys to the guys to your side are the shine, right?
So I don't know if you've ever watched those Western movies where the guy, he'll lock somebody and they lock the door from the outside, not from the inside. That's what my two boys do to me now, is they lock me in my office because they're afraid of what I might go out and do or say. But I really do get to now do what the fun part of the business. They deal with the daily operations of the several different businesses that we have and the headaches of all that. Because I'm a guy that backed into owning a business. It wasn't really a goal. I had an idea and needed to own a business to do that. But I'm really a scientific geek. I love the chemistry of the lab. I love working out chemistry equations. I love all of that side of it, the research side of it. And that's really where my focus is today. And then doing of course, the training and the teaching, that's where my heart is. And I get to do that while my two boys, they literally have picked up the business and ran with it. And it's better because of it. It's better because of it.
Yeah, and I love this is again why I like the story, right? When you look at the relatability as us as producers in the marketplace, right? It's all about passing it on to the next generation. I love the story of locking. I mean, I know producers on the line would love to. Some of the younger ones would like to lock dad into the cab, maybe, right? No opinions, Pop. But
Yeah, and we start early. So I have a granddaughter that is 3, and she's now trained that her vacation is going to Redox. That's how.
I love it. Well, so for those of you that don't know, I guess maybe if I don't know which one's my left and right, but the son, Colton, wearing the dark shirt on my right, Colton he's the president of Redox out of Burley, Idaho. And then
Correct.
On the left side, the light, I'm going to call that pink or red. Cody, that's pretty bold. If that is pink, I can't really tell from my screen. Cody runs Ag Nutrients, the retail division out of Florida and Georgia. So
correct.
It
Correct.
is really cool. If you haven't met these guys, I'm sure you will. We'll have to have another podcast or an interview with those two and kind of see what if they got any dirt on you there.
Yeah. They have some stories to tell. I guarantee it.
Well, speaking of getting geeked out and locked in closet, if you go to the next slide, I think that this is a testament to kind of what you've been able to create. And I don't want to pump your tires up too much, but I do want to talk about some of the foundational approach of the business and the scientific stuff we'll get into in just a minute. But if you look at worldwide, over 9 patents, 25 different registered trademarks, over the period of 30 years, it's pretty impressive. You're continuing to add to that in the business side of things. The Fertility Institute is now certifying biostimulants. I think we have 3 of the 10 internationally that are registered.
Correct.
So
correct. Yeah, and I just found out this morning we just got our certificate for the European Union, so we are growing. We are growing, and we're committed to growing. We're committed to the technology that we talk about. And Chad, I think the most important thing on this slide is the independent verification of what we do. The ISO certification is, wow, it is critical. In fact, we had a meeting about it this morning, and my daughter, who just got or last year just got a degree from law school, has come on board, and that's one of her tasks, is to take that department over. And she said, "Wow, Dad, there's a lot to this. This is a big deal." And I said, "Yeah, it's a big deal from our end. It's a big deal to be able to talk about it, but the commitment to be ISO certified is a huge company commitment." I mean, the fact that I would take her, she could go get a job many places. I was able to twist her arm and get her to come here, part of the family business, take her law degree, and as part of her discipline, be able to do that. It's a big deal. It's a big commitment for us.
It's a lot. I was just at a meeting last week and we were talking about ISO 9000. I only know of 2 companies in our space that are doing this today, and there may be more, but I've been around a little bit. It's not easy, but the farmer side of that is, at the grower side, how many times have you had a jug that you look at a jug and one time it's a light color and the next time it's a dark color? But it's more than that. It's, as a business, ISO 9001. It's not just what's in the jug, it's how we operate as well. Right. And I think it's an important thing to note as you compare things that are in the industry that you work, or companies that you work with, take this into consideration, right?
And Chad, if you'll let me just expand on that very briefly. If you look at the substances that are listed there, are active molecules. If you're dealing in the biostimulant world, if you're dealing in the biological world, you're dealing with a molecule that's made out of carbon. and it is in a constant state of change or decomposition. Okay. That is why ISO certification is so big. And I would encourage all growers, independent of redox, to look for that verification that there is consistency in the product. Because from an organic or a biological molecule perspective, that's really hard to do. Every single time you do it, every year for millions of gallons and dozens of products, they all come out with the guaranteed analysis, not just of the NPK that's on the jug, but the consistency of the biological molecule that's in that jug. And I go to the university, I believe it was the University of Illinois, that did the testing on the biological products of, I think they did 23 biological products. Not one of them had the organism in it that was claimed on the label. I'm not going to point the finger at those companies other than to simply say if they were ISO certified, they wouldn't have to worry about that because they would have the procedure in place to guarantee that what was in the jug on the label was in the jug. That's what we do.
It's a big deal. And I know those are big words, right? For the guys that maybe they slept through the chemistry class or, maybe didn't take biology in school. Just understand, right? It is a foundational approach within Redox that we will stand behind the products, the things that are in the products. And this is why the products are at a low use rate and we know they work and where they work best. So let's talk about that for a second, because I think, there's been a lot of marketing that has been trying to basically put the same message out there. But I do want to talk about plant charge balance. I want to talk about the core foundation. Ooh, that gets right into some tough stuff right there. But I do want to talk about it because listen, this is a big piece. When we start talking about balancing energy that builds yields, some of the foundation of what we just talked about of what is in a product, how does it work? Well, I want to tell you everything in terms of plant charge balance, any nutrient, any fertility that you put out has some sort of a charge associated with it. So Darin, how do you get farmer grade when you see a slide like this and start talking about plant charge balance?
Yeah, this is not new, Chad. This is new to be discussed, but this is not something that we just discovered. You can go back to old textbooks and you can, plant physiology books, and they talk about plant charge balance. This is not a new discovery in agriculture. I believe what has happened in agriculture, what did happen in agriculture, is there was so much success in the 50s and 60s and early 70s with the new fertilizer, the NPK blends that we came out with. We increased yield and plant growth so significantly compared to the previous centuries of manure and other types of applications that we went to products and end result, and we skipped over how things happen. Okay. And so we got in that rut of we focused more on the fertilizer rate and amount than we did on what the fertilizer was actually doing in the soil and in the plant. So what we're trying to do at Redox is bring it back to reality, which is this isn't a knock of fertilizers. This is simply the reality of plants must have a 50-50 positive and negative charge. That is a scientific, biological, God made it this way fact. So if that is the foundation of how plants grow is based on positive and negative charge and how things are taken up, then we can take a step back and look at the way that we think and use fertilizer. So one of my quotes that I try to drill in is we do not think about charge per acre. We think about pounds or tons per acre of fertilizer. And yet every pound of fertilizer that we put on has a charge. It is a salt. It has a charge. And all I am asking people to do is take a step back and say, what is the fertilizer that I'm doing contributing to the ability of that plant to generate 50-50 charge balance? Because if I over apply, and nitrogen is the most egregious chemical that we over apply, I am creating imbalance in the plant, and then the plant must work to balance itself at the sacrifice of yield and quality. And that's the take-home message here is if we accept the fact that we need 50-50 plant charge balance, the downside of that is when I'm not in balance, the plant will take energy processes away from yield and quality and put them into root exudates that go out into the soil, search for the right charge, and pull it back into the plant. That's the way it works, okay? So I'm just asking people to consider that as we put together a fertilizer program, and we can get into some of the ways to fix that, okay? But the foundation of this presentation and a foundation of everything that we do at Redox begins right here. And that is the products that we utilize, the agronomy that we talk about, all help the plant easier achieve plant charge balance.
Love it. I love it. And so here's two things that I'm going to add to that because, when you start, first off, Darin, where you do your best work is in front of a whiteboard. I know you're kind of
Yeah.
handicapped today without
Yeah.
that. But, if and most of the folks on the line probably understand this in one way, shape, or form, have seen this Liebig's law of the minimums, right? What is your leaky bucket? What is the limiting factor? I would contend that the most limiting factor for us in production agriculture is charge balance. If we don't understand if that plant is constantly working, I'm just going to summarize what you said, Darin. If the plant is constantly working to be at that 50-50 balance, it's robbing that energy that would have been used for production, which we get paid on as producers to correct the stress. That is the fundamental.
You are 100% correct, Chad. And here's the issue. When we are not pushing a plant to yield, in other words, if we were going to settle on 50 bushel of corn, this wouldn't be an issue. This isn't an issue because the soil and the plant can metabolize at a rate that can do that. When we are pushing yields at 250, 300 plus bushel, or whatever crop we want to talk about, 100 bins of apples, or 2,000 boxes of grapes, or 4,000 pounds of almonds, those are all that's all high yield stuff, okay, which is a requirement now to stay in agriculture is you got to be on the cutting edge of yield, okay? If we're pushing those yields, that's where this becomes acute, is to push those yields, what do? We put on a whole bunch of fertilizer, and we put that fertilizer on at pounds per acre without consideration of charge. And I will point to the fact that nitrogen is the largest culprit to put a plant out of plant charge balance.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting too. Again, we're talking to tree nut fruit guys, all the way down to row crop guys, potato guys here. The limiting factor may not necessarily be nitrogen, but if we are over applying a certain nutrient, it changes that charge inside of the plant, and that stress is occurring. I think one of the things as I look at this, though, Darin, when we talk about nitrogen, I'll say row crop for my row crop guys. When we talk about nitrogen being when we talk about the amount of negative charge that nitrate nitrogen brings, maybe talk a little bit about what we're looking here and kind of how that nitrate nitrogen can cause that stress.
Sure. Let's go there. Okay, so the purpose of this slide is to do twofold. We look at the previous slide, all of the fertilizers that we put on carry a charge. If we look at this slide, this is the most important chemical reaction on Earth. It is the single most important chemical reaction on Earth. No other reaction is more important, and that is the reaction of photosynthesis that creates the plant life that we consume to have the energy as humans to work every day, okay? And if you will notice, the byproduct of photosynthesis is the water molecule being split, and they create 4 electrons and 4 protons, or 4 hydrogen atoms. They are charged. So not only is the nutrients that I utilize charged, but the reaction of photosynthesis itself creates a charge gradient in the plant. And it is that electron gradient, that electron chain from photosynthesis that then fixes carbon dioxide to create carbohydrates. And then I bring in nitrogen to combine with the carbohydrate and a little bit of sulfur, and I create amino acids, and then I create proteins, and I create flours and phenolic compounds and corn kernels and apples and grapes and kiwis and potatoes and all of that stuff. But it starts with a charged reaction from photosynthesis. And so the question that I always try to get people to think is if the fertilizer that we're producing or the minerals that a plant takes up is charged, and the most important and basic reaction in plant growth is the splitting of the water molecule to create charge, don't you think we should be considering charge in our agronomy and in our fertility programs? Of course we should. Of course we should.
100%. I think to that point too, and I think it's worth noting, we talk a lot about CEC, we talk about pH, but EH we never talk about, right?
Correct. And EH, so the first one of the basic questions, Chad, is how do you measure this? How do you measure charge? It is a measurement called EH, okay? And that measurement gives in millivolts the charge potential of that plant, negative or positive, okay? And there's been some great work not done by Redox, but we picked it up and ran with it in conjunction with. There's been some great work out of France for the last 12 plus years about knowing what the proper EH value of a plant should be. And it's between 2 and 400 millivolts. Okay. And so imagine this. If I can get my plant to be within 2 to 400 millivolts, Dr. Hussan from France has proven that I have less insect pressure, less disease pressure. I have stronger plant growth. I have a higher capacity for yield, all because in that range, my plant is closer to charge balance. Okay. And that is critical that we understand that there is a measurement, and that B, we know what that measurement should be.
Yeah, I think that's a great statement there. In terms of maybe somebody that this is their first time tuning in, Darin, and I know that maybe the first 2 or 3 times that I listened to it, it takes somebody maybe a little bit of time to be able to think of things differently, right? You talked about it. Instead of pounds per acre, we're talking charge per acre. Maybe there's a story here, maybe not. But when you look at photosynthesis, it's the number one redox reaction in the
Correct.
world, right?
Correct.
That's what makes the world go round. How did you find the name Redox Bio-Nutrients? How in the world were you that fortuitous thinking that, hey, this is what we're going to name the business?
I'm not that smart, Chad. I'm not that smart. Okay. But the first patent that I achieved was a redox reaction patent. And the name stuck with me. And I liked the name, and it described what I was doing and what I believed was a very powerful reaction from a product side. And as we have researched that basic first product and understood the genetic pathways and all of the enzyme cascades that occur in a plant when we apply that product, we started to realize that we were dealing with redox reactions and with charge. That's what a redox reaction is it's oxidation reduction, charge. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And as we dove further and further into that, we began to realize the incredible significance of understanding how the chemistry that we use affects charge balance in plants. So it goes back to my first patent, the name redox, but redox activity, that's not the name of my company. That's the name of a chemical reaction. I stole the name from a basic reaction, truthfully. Okay.
How cool is that? So yeah, I think I think it's cool to understand that, right? Because at the end of the day, when we talk about some of the agronomic principles, right? We talk about pH, we talk about CEC, but we never talk about EH, measuring, electrical conductivity. We don't talk about redox reactions. Again, I'm going to contend that this is probably one of the most limiting factors for us as producers is how do we understand it? How do we use it? And then we'll talk about how do we get started. Well, we haven't even talked products yet, Darin, and we'll get to that. But I think the science and the foundation behind what it is that we do is kind of the core of how we operate as a company too. And I think that's important. So when you talk about plant energy and metabolism,
go ahead and finish.
I just, with plant energy, plant metabolism, what I think we do better than anybody else, and there's some imposters out there, right? But we do a very good job educating the marketplace. So I think if you listen and learn, you're going to be able to implement this onto your operation, Darin.
Chad, the most important thing to me, and this is my baby, okay? We are in the business to make money. I'm not going to lie to anybody. We are in the business to make money. But the singular most important thing to me is that people understand the why behind what we do. That is critical to me, because the worst thing you can do is rely on a product. The best thing you can do is rely on science and then pick your product. Oh, that makes a lot more sense to me, to understand the science and then be able to pick the best product or products or the best technology that fits the science that I understand and the direction I want to go with my farm. But if I just understand products, I'm always relying on what the guy tells me about the product. No. Understand the science and require whoever's walking on your farm to fit that science with whatever they're talking to you about. And if it doesn't fit, find the one that does fit. That's really critical at Redox Bio-Nutrients, is that people understand the why of what we do.
I love it. Before we go to the next slide here, I do want to talk again, when you look at the company as a whole, constant innovation, you talk about how do we improve the industry through innovation and technology. I talk about mission statements of the company, right? The fact that we are deeply rooted in agronomy, right? And economic principles. But when you look at how you apply that in the world, Darin, the first time we met was probably about 3 years ago now, almost exactly 3 years ago. The thing you told me, which still sticks to me to this day, is, Chad, what we do as a business is, we support growers, but we find the best people, right? We tell the truth, everything else falls into place. I
Correct.
love it. I love it.
Correct. I don't have to worry after someone goes through our training. I don't have to worry about what they say, because they're not going to go out and find a book or find a scientific article that doesn't agree with what, because that's where our basis is we go through the scientific steps and principles before we ever sell a product. A product has to qualify itself to be on the shelf with us in the first place. We're not desperate to sell products before their time. So we have the product technology and the science behind it that we can walk out to growers and we can literally discuss the why, and then understanding their operation, try to fit this technology into their operation.
I love it. Darin, a lot of the illustrations that we're going to see coming up next are illustrations that are owned by Redox, things that you've created over a period of time. For the ones that's kind of like a scary movie, for those that ones that scare easy on complexity, right? Look away now. I would tell you, do not get overwhelmed, because Darin does a better job than anybody else that I've been or that I've seen is explaining what it is that we're going to talk about next. If you could advance the slide. A lot of stuff going on here, Darin. Don't want to scare anybody away. But the simplicity of this, you do such a great job. I'll let you talk about Redox Active Molecules and RAM technology.
Yeah. So first of all, I want everybody listening to know that my dad was a high school biology teacher, and we had a 300-acre farm. And I remember one time coming home and he was furious with me because I was failing biology in high school and I hated chemistry. Okay. I don't mean to go down this road, other than I've tried to simplify it as much as possible, because now I love biology and now I love chemistry because I understand how important it is in what we do. But the slide is really basic, and let's just go through it. If you look at the top of the slide, we have sunlight energy, water, and carbon dioxide. We go through photosynthesis. And the first product of photosynthesis is a carbohydrate, a sugar molecule, CH2O, okay? And that sugar molecule forms the basis of energy in the plant, okay? In that reaction, we have, everybody understands, adenosine triphosphate, ATP, and that's the basic energy molecule of the plant. There are two pathways representative here. If you stay on the outside circle, you go from carbohydrates to amino acids and proteins, and then you get growth and development. That's a basic diagram of what we learned in biology in high school, okay? The inner part of the diagram is what we focus on, and those are the secondary compounds that are produced in plants. The lipids and the phenolic compounds and the terpenes and the ketones and all of those things that determine what color the leaf is, that determine kernel fill, all of the things that are the ancillary things to what you drive down the road at 50 miles an hour and see the green corn plant that's 8 feet tall, 10 feet tall, whatever it is. That's the outer pathway, and that's the simplicity. What I am trying to propose to people is we have maxed the outer diagram out. I can't put on more nitrogen and get more yield. It's just not. We've maxed that out from an ROI perspective. So if we look at units of nitrogen per bushel of corn, or units of nitrogen per box of apples, or whatever, okay? If we say that we have a 1 NUE on corn, or I have a whatever it would be on any other crop, that means for every bushel of corn, I put on 1 pound of nitrogen. If I could get more of that, that would mean if I put on 2 pounds of nitrogen, I could get double the amount of corn. And we know that's no longer true. That used to be true. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was an unlimited, with the increase in genetics, and there was unlimited upside yield potential. We just kept doing it and doing it and doing it. It's fantastic. Now in today's agriculture, we have maxed out what just conventional agriculture can do. And the focus of Redox is, now that we've maxed it out and we've focused a lot on just nitrogen application, particularly in corn crops, but that's the number one input in agriculture is nitrogen. What we have forgotten is what it takes to convert that nitrogen into usable compounds. So nitrate nitrogen, Chad, is not usable by the plant. And yet it's 80% of all of what a plant takes up is in the form of nitrate nitrogen. No matter what form of fertilizer you put on, 80% of that nitrogen ends up as nitrate nitrogen in the plant leaf. The plant then has to convert that nitrogen through a process called nitrogen reduction, nitrate reductase, into ammonia. That's as deep as we're going to go into chemistry. Here's the problem. If we over apply the nitrate nitrogen, it sits there in the leaf and it actually can, in my opinion, become toxic to the plant because it robs energy that is necessary to produce some of these ancillary compounds to deal with that stored nitrate nitrogen. Okay, that's the critical part of this slide. Is we want to deal with plant charge balance, and we want to promote both the outer circle, which is the primary metabolic pathway, and the inner circle, which is the secondary metabolic pathway. When they are both functioning at a high rate, I have a plant that is healthier. I have a plant that is top yielding. I have a plant that is less susceptible to abiotic stress, drought stress, etc. Drought stress and nitrate nitrogen are enemies, or excuse me, they're friends. The more
Sure.
nitrate nitrogen I have in my plant, the more susceptible it is to drought stress because it cannot produce the secondary compounds necessary to deal with drought. That's just one example, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So what we're trying to do in this Redox Active Molecule technology is we're trying to deal with the creation of these secondary metabolic compounds. One of the metabolic compounds that we focus on at Redox is called a Redox Active Molecule. That's a real term. That's a scientific term, okay? That Redox Active Molecule can either absorb a charge. Now we're getting back to plant charge balance. It can either
Yep.
absorb a charge or it can give off a charge. It has the ability to do both. So if I can increase the ability of the plant to deal with charge, then that plant is less susceptible to imbalance, to charge imbalance. Therefore, it can grow better. This is how we're getting our increase in yield. This is how we're reducing fertilizer rates, is because our plant is now more efficient in how it's growing because of Redox Active Molecules and the ability of that, the increased ability of that plant to deal with charge. Redox Active Molecules are a product of the secondary metabolic pathway.
Darin, and that is the core. So what you heard there is the core to the technology in most, if not all, the products that Redox offers. If you think about this, and I just want to go back a little bit, because if I go back to farmer grade, you talked about it, the big circle, right? That big circle where we've met our limitations in that NPK, or how we process in that primary metabolic pathway. If we're not balanced, you guys, right? If we're not in that 50-50 plant charge balance, we have no way of accessing that secondary metabolic pathway that Darin's talking about. If we can access that secondary metabolic pathway with RAM technology, you heard it here, right? Being able to give on or take charge. Now all of a sudden you can push yield, you can pull back nutrients, you can do all these things that maybe has been thought of as impossible before. And that's why some of our use rates are as low as they are.
You make an excellent point, and I just want to bring home, how do we do that in this diagram? Two ways. We actually provide in our products Redox Active Molecules, and we provide biostimulants in our product that stimulate the plant to produce its own Redox Active Molecules. Therefore, we're forcing this system away from nitrate heavy or ion heavy to balance, because we're providing Redox Active Molecules that can give charge balance to the plant, and we're stimulating the secondary metabolic pathway within plants to have the plant produce its own Redox Active Molecules. That is critical to charge balance in a plant, because here's another fact. There is no way that you can do a calculation based on a soil test and a tissue test and put on exactly the right fertilizer to minerally achieve plant charge balance. You have to include an organic molecule in this process. That is a scientific fact. Without organic molecules, you cannot achieve plant charge balance. You cannot minerally balance a plant. It will not happen. Redox Active Molecules exist for this very reason.
And I think the differentiation, again, we still haven't talked about a product, but I do want to make sure that, the group understands is what makes Redox unique as a biostimulant is with that pairing with nutrients. Right.
Correct.
So that to me, I don't care if, again, what crop it is, if you're looking at applying calcium or a humic or nitrogen, phos, right? Whatever it is, again, not all of our products, but most of our products have Redox Active Molecules, RAM technology, that allows us to help metabolize those nutrients better. But most of them are paired inside the product with a biostimulant. Most of those nutrients are.
And I just want to make this case, Chad. Another scientific fact, depending on the plant species, the plant will exude out in the soil between 10 and 20,000 pounds of exudates.
Mm.
Imagine. That's not plant. That's not the plant. That's what it pushes out through the roots and into the soil. Why is it doing that? It's doing that for one of two reasons: to deal with stress or to deal with charge balance. What if, because we're stimulating the plant, we're balancing our fertilizer, we're putting these redox active molecules, what if I could just reduce the amount of exudates by 10%? What have I just done to my plant weight and my yield?
Mm.
Imagine.
Game changer. Yeah,
Imagine,
game
it's a game
changer.
changer. We will never prevent the plant from doing root exudates because that's how it balances the soil and does its thing. But if we can focus the energy so the plant's not having to work so hard on plant charge balance and soil extraction, we can just reduce it by a little bit. All of that root exudate, all of those going out into the soil, some of it can be maintained in the plant to go to yield or to deal with environmental stresses, etc. It's a game changer. It's literally a game changer.
Well, and I think, Darin, last time we were out, I think we did a master class out in Idaho. We had quite a few folks that were trying to compare products or different nutrients and talking. Great questions, which, by the way, for whoever was out there. But I think what the understanding was, if you go to the next slide, not all products are created equal, right? And so if you look at the function of redox active molecules and how our products are built, we look at movement, absorption, translocation, how it's metabolized and utilization in the production of our products. Would you mind talking about that a little bit?
I'll be very brief. In
Yep.
order for a product to work in the soil, it has to be able to move in the soil. Has to. Okay. But we're dealing with multiple chemistry environments here. We have the soil environment. We have the soil water environment. I have to deal with that. Then when I move, when the water moves along and that nutrient that I put in the soil hits the root, I now have a totally different chemistry environment. I have to make sure that I've done things in my product so that mineral or that molecule can be absorbed. So we go from movement in the soil to absorption. Once I get inside the plant, guess what? Now I have an entirely different chemistry environment, okay? Because if I can't get it from the root to where it needs to be in the plant, all I do is sit in the root. So now I have to translocate that molecule. Then when I get to in the vascular system, I get to the cell that it needs to go into. I go inside the cell. I have a totally different chemistry environment. Okay. And it has to
Sure.
metabolize in the cell. And then once it's metabolized, it's got to be utilized or pushed back out of the cell or in the cell, moved around to where it can be utilized to do whatever the plant needs it to do at that point in time. That is how we actually look at a product, is it has to fill all 5 of these requirements in order for it to be so effective. And again, Chad, to your point, if I want to, which is where we've gone in agriculture a little bit, I can put so much product on that I just literally force feed the plant. I'm literally force feeding the plant. Or I can understand these things. I can make additions to my product so that I'm not overstimulating the system. My system is more balanced and I'm much more targeted in my approach. That's why our use rates are so low, is because we don't just put on bulk, we put on the ability of that mineral or that molecule to move all the way through the system and do what it needs to do.
It's precision agriculture at its finest, right?
Correct.
You're looking at the precision amount of charge. You talked about it. We can measure it in millivolts. Are we there as an industry yet? Probably not quite yet. There are people working towards that. But we know if we're applying too much energy, and I'll go back to, I'm going to get out beyond my skis and talk about apples in a minute. But, like for my Midwest crop guys, when we go out and start taking tissues and we try to make an application because we're deficient based off of our ratio needs, and all of a sudden the next week we move energy in the plant, you see it. And then guess what? You go make another application because you're moving that energy in the plant based off whatever application you're making. For the guys that do weekly tissue sampling, petiole sampling, you can see that energy movement. Darin, when you start talking about the proprietary side of how we build things, like apple guys, when you start, let's just talk calcium in apples, right? Like not all calcium is created equally too. Like when you look at it, microencapsulation is how does it get taken up? How does it translocate? How does it get utilized? How does it metabolize calcium? Like all these things matter.
So to your point, Chad, we actually have a phosphorus material that can blend with calcium. Why? Because imagine, is there calcium in the soils that we farm? Yes. If I put phosphorus on the soil that I farm and it has free calcium, what's going to happen to the phosphorus? It's going to form calcium phosphate. That's just a scientific fact. So what have we chosen to do in agriculture? We overload the system when we put so much phosphorus on that just a little bit gets into the plant. Calcium's no different. Okay. If I put enough calcium on, I'll force feed the plant. or I can deal with this slide and deal with a product that takes into account all of those issues, and therefore my use rates are low. I make the case to everyone listening. We have gotten used to the use rates in agriculture because that's what we know. That doesn't mean that that's exactly what the plant needs. We've written in inefficiency into the system. Right now, we've written inefficiency into the system. I'm making the case that we're better than that. I'm making the case that science has advanced enough that we no longer need to write so much inefficiency into the system, because we can now understand movement, absorption, translocation, metabolism, and utilization, and we can build that into a product, and that molecule moves through the system and gets to its point much easier than the traditional old product chemistries.
I love it. I do want to talk high level. Kind of some of, I think the next slide is all about manufacturing, right? I think as you look at companies in the marketplace, everybody has something that's a bit unique. But I do think of, like humics, for example. I told you the story a while back where we were out in the field talking to a bunch of growers, and everybody kind of raised their hands. We're using some sort of a humic. And then you asked about what variety or brand that humic was, and maybe half of that group knew what it was. And then the other half, when they asked where it came from, some were international, some didn't know. Like, not all products are created equally. And I think, to me, the biggest thing that comes up is fractionation. How do we get what we want out of the products and the molecules that we're putting in jugs? Fractionation.
So this goes a little bit back to the first slide about ISO. Okay, we understand our product chemistries. We understand them as much, I think, as anybody in the industry can possibly understand them, and that is this. I talked about ISO and the fact that we're dealing with biological molecules. Leonardite is the source of humic acid is a biological molecule. Okay, how you handle it is critical. Okay, not only that, but about a third of what you're extracting from leonardite, the plant really doesn't want to deal with. Okay, how do you separate that out? Or do you just put on more and take that into account, or written in inefficiency? Okay, then I want to get a specific reaction in the plant. I'm not just providing organic material. I'm providing an organic molecule that provides a specific reaction in the plant. Our humic acid selected material is very high in Redox Active Molecules. We fractionate it down, and we focus a high concentration of the humic acid portion on Redox Active Molecules, because I want to, everybody applies, not everybody, most people apply humic acid with their fertilizer or in a fertility program. If my fertilizer is charged, does it not make sense that I want to include a Redox Active Molecule in that fertilizer charge? Of course it makes sense. I don't want just an organic molecule. I want a molecule that can deal with charge. Redox Active Molecules deal with charge. That is what we focus on. As an example, just one product. We have multiple products with multiple sources of biological material. But in a case, for example, if everybody understands or uses humic acid, we are fractionating those molecules to get specific molecules to perform specific processes in the plant or in the soil.
I think that's a really important piece. And we're not going to have enough time to talk about extraction, but if you go to the next slide, please. When you talk about chelation and complexing, microencapsulation, to me, going back to that, the calcium story, right? You're talking about a phosphorus calcium, or if you're looking at, by the way, 2 calcium products that have been endorsed by the Fertility Institute as a certified biostimulant. One of those is calcium 2.0, a 20% calcium
Correct.
that we can soil apply. And the other one is a foliar applied 10% calcium called Mainstay SI with a silicone. Will you talk a little bit about microencapsulation and how we can, that absorption?
You bet. One of the most important things that we do is protect charge. Okay. So if I have calcium, the only way calcium can be taken into the plant is if it has a double positive charge. If in my blend or when I put it in the soil, it reacts with something else and forms calcium phosphate, I've lost that fertilizer. It's gone. Okay. And it takes a very high level energy reaction, either through acid input or through biology, to reconstitute that calcium or that phosphorus molecule. We take that into account. So as we formulate, we have developed a set of surfactants that deal with charge and surround that molecule and protect it as it moves through the soil to get it to the plant root where it can be delivered as the properly charged molecule. That's really, really critical. Again, that's why our use rates are so low, is we are allowing that molecule to move through that soil. So what do we call the soil? We call it dirt. It's dirty. It's a filter. It's really tough to move things in the soil if you don't try to help things move in the soil. We do. Every one of our products take into account the ability to move that molecule through the soil.
I love it. Darin, we're down to the last 10 minutes, and I would love to go more into the science. And for those of you that are in the science side, we will we'll happily go deeper into some of this. Darin, you know me, I like to stay in somewhat the shallow,
Yeah,
maybe go into the middle, but I don't like going deep. But I did have some questions that were submitted that I'd like to get to. You
let's
care
go.
if we hit a couple of
Yep,
them?
let's go. Let's go.
I love it. I think you talked a little bit about it, but where does a farmer get started with RAM technology, right? If a guy that's in corn, looking at nitrogen, we talk about RDXN. If a guy that's in apples is looking at a solution, like, how do I get started? What's the easy button?
I think you asked the question. So number one, either through this conversation or other conversations we can have to just simply understand redox active molecules, redox reactions. And I don't mean understand chemistry. I simply need to understand, everybody understands positive and negative charge, and everybody understands balance. If you can understand those two things and understand that our fertility, particularly with the use of nitrogen, has created imbalance in the plant, and the plant has to work to balance that out, then the next question should be, okay, what material can I add to my fertilizer to make it more efficient so I can actually use less fertilizer, not zero fertilizer, but a small amount less fertilizer so the system doesn't become overcharged or imbalanced, and move those molecules through the system easier. That's the question you have to ask is, what products can I add? And those products should be focused on redox active molecules because we're dealing with charge. I'm not knocking the seaweeds of the world. I'm not knocking what's present in the market. What I'm saying is we've taken what's present in the market and moved it to a whole nother lane. And that lane is we are dealing with charge balance, not just with organic molecules. We help the plant balance charge. That's the focus of every extraction that we do, every fractionation that we do, every additive that we have to our material focuses on charge balance. So how do you get started in that? That's the conversation you have to have with whoever you're buying your fertilizer from is, can you add to my fertilizer a molecule that helps the plant with plant charge balance?
Which by the answer to that, it should be every time yes, but you
Yes.
have to find redox
Yes.
active molecules, which just so happens, right? We're in the business.
Correct.
Shameless plug here, Darin, on that same thing. If I talk about row crop guys, what we've seen this year, we can reduce quite a bit on our fertility costs, especially with nitrogen. So when we look at, on average this year, we had a 38-pound reduction with a 5-bushel lift using a product called RDXN. Why? Low use rate, RDXN has RAM technology. We balance that charge. We can help metabolize nitrogen and make it more plant available. And that's really what it is. How do you make more nutrients plant available? Utilizing RAM technology.
I just want to make sure this point is understood because there's so many companies that make claims about fertilizer reduction and they have no clue how their product does that. We know. We have literally followed the gene sequencing in plants and we understand exactly at what point our product does what. Okay. Here's my point. The plant is not using less nitrogen. It is metabolizing nitrogen better. I hope that hits home. The plant is not utilizing less nitrogen. It is metabolizing that nitrogen at a higher efficiency. Therefore, it needs less. We have written, I emphasize, we have written into our fertility programs inefficiency. My goal
100%.
is to reduce that significantly. I'm not reducing fertilizer. I am reducing inefficiency. And I want to make that point clear. We are not reducing fertilizer. We are reducing the inefficiency of the fertilizer we apply or the inadequacy of the plant that we are applying it to properly metabolize it. We are covering that base as best as we can, and we're working on ways to do it better. But I want to emphasize because there are so many companies that say you can reduce your fertilizer by this much. How? The first question that they should ask is how. We are probably one of oh man, I don't know anybody that knows more about this particular technology and nitrogen metabolism than we do. And we are really good at it. But I want to kill the idea of fertilizer reduction. It is nutrient efficiency that we are dealing with, and we are writing inefficiencies out of the system.
Love it. Let's talk about that, right? Because we are at the forefront of this Redox Active Molecules being able to help metabolize nutrients better. When you look at, and you talked about it, I won't go deep into the science, but you guys, how many times have you seen products? I guarantee they're going to work because we can show that we're carrying more nitrogen in the leaf, right? We do, right? There's no doubt. Plants can take up nitrate, nitrogen very easily. The problem, you guys, is that we store that nitrogen, and that's where that stress comes from. To Darin's point, we need to be able to figure out how to turn that into a usable format, ammoniacal form, right?
Correct.
How do we do that? Help metabolize nutrients through redox active molecules.
That is the key, is we are metabolizing better. This is a plant active molecule. We're not creating more nitrogen in the soil. We're not fixing more nitrogen, or we're not pulling nitrogen out of the air. We are turning on nitrate reductase and a few other things that I won't get into right now. We are turning on nitrate reductase, which takes the nitrate nitrogen in the plant and converts it at a higher level. Therefore, the plant needs less. That's just a fact. Okay. We're taking inefficiency out of the system.
You've answered three of the other questions here with that little 3-minute conversation. So I do want to switch one. I'm going to reword it a little bit. How does plant charge balance interact with soil nutrients, soil biology throughout the season?
Yeah. So we have focused solely on the ability of the plant to metabolize, because once we discovered that's mostly what we were doing, we stayed there and stayed in that focus. There is no question that when I balance the plant, I am starting to balance the soil. In fact, one of our agronomic principles at Redox is the best way to balance a soil is balance a plant. Why would I say that? Because there's so much focus on adding bugs to the soil, adding all these things to the soil. I'm not against that, but here's what I'm going to say. 98% of all biological activity in the soil takes place within 2 centimeters of a root. If I take that root out of the system, soil biology goes down by 98%. That is a fact, okay? So I'm all for proper biology added to the soil. But what we're focused on at Redox is if I can help my plant grow better, the root exudates, the 10 to 20,000 pounds of root exudates or whatever it does to help that soil become more balanced will happen. It will happen. The best way to balance a soil is grow a healthy plant.
I love it. Darin, we were out at it was a classic. I think we were out in Nebraska, and somebody had talked about using a product. They were talking about residual effect. We're like, well, geez, we don't have a residual effect. It's used in season. But what they really were getting to, Darin, was that effect on soil, because if we can keep that microbial activity working, we see a benefit of a healthier soil that we can see that next season. And almost to the line, they were talking about they could see the difference in where they applied versus not applied. That's exactly to your point.
That is, and to that point, Chad, and then to the other point is, what is the best way to destroy soil microbiology? Put on a salt. What are fertilizers? They're salt. Now, if we put on judicious amounts of fertilizer, we can actually enhance soil biology. I'm just simply suggesting, think about when I put out my anhydrous ammonia, or when I put out my 500, 600, 700, 800 pounds all at once of dry fertilizer, what am I doing? And all I'm suggesting is if we can anyway optimize that, so I'm putting out just a little bit less, I am helping the system, the soil system that everybody's focused on right now, I am helping that system become more balanced. You have to focus, or you have to think of it that way, which is farming upsets the system. I till the soil, I oxidize organic compounds. That's all well and good. That's how we make our money. The more I can do to help that system help itself, the number one helper in soil biology is plant roots. The number one helper in soil biology is plant roots.
One question here, and I'm going to need your help on this one. We talk about abiotic stress very often, but I think it's been a few weeks ago. We were talking about the weather out of the gate. The question comes around abiotic stress, cold and heat tolerance. When we start talking about specialty crops specifically, right? So we have the number one selling product inside of Redox is called DiCap. Will you talk a little bit about how we can prevent, some of that?
Yeah,
stress?
sure. So stay on this slide, because this slide does it for us. The way you deal with heat stress and cold stress is secondary metabolites. If my plant, everybody knows this, everybody listening knows this. If my plant is happy with nitrogen, it wilts faster in a hot afternoon, okay? Or it's more susceptible to cold. Everybody knows that if I have a happy plant that's really high in nitrate nitrogen, a vegetative plant, okay? If I have a balanced plant, I can be a little bit hotter. I can be a little bit drier, and it grows through it. It grows through it by that secondary metabolic pathway, the lipids, the phenols, the terpenes, the ketones, the vitamins that the plant produces in small quantities, all help that plant to balance the redox active molecules that help the plant balance charge, but also balance cell structure, balance cell turgidity, all of those things. It is based on the secondary metabolic pathway. DICAT, for example, stimulates a specific pathway dealing with heat and cold stress, okay? And the plant is more able to deal with lower temperatures or excess temperatures where water translocation is really, really difficult. It will survive, or it will grow at a much better pace because we're stimulating those redox active molecules and those pathways that help it deal with that.
Perfect. And again, another shameless plug here for the Midwest guys that maybe heard that exact same thing. DICAP in the Midwest is essentially NOx or Banks. Banks is that zinc boron combo that we need so much in our corn crop. Darin, we've kind of ran out of time here, but I do want to leave you with a couple thoughts. Those who've joined us, thank you. Healthier plants, more resilient systems equals more bushels, right? And Redox Active Molecules is certainly a solution that you should explore. I would challenge you to explore it, educate yourselves a little bit more. I think you'll find the Redox team very open to either visiting your farm. There's some really cool tools that we have in the tool chest, and our team's readily available. When you start looking at how do we get started, Darin, you talked about it, but enabling your operation to be able to add its capacity. We've hit ceilings. We know we've hit ceilings, and I don't care if it's the 200 bushel guy that's trying to hit 240, or the 240 guy that's hitting, or the David Hulas that are hitting 620, right? My challenge to you is to try to figure out yield limitations, utilizing Redox Active Molecules and tools that Redox can get as solutions on your operation this year. Darin, I'll give you the final words. What's the one thing you want to leave
Chad,
with?
I couldn't say it better, okay? And that is, either we can push more yield, that's a goal of Redox every day, push more yield, or we can reduce stress. And by reducing stress, I may reduce a fungicide application, an insecticide application. I may get more out of the water, whether it's rainwater or irrigation water. All of these things, looking at the entire agronomic picture, start with charge balance. They all start with charge balance, and charge balance is mitigated by Redox Active Molecules. I assure you, within 5 years, this industry will be talking every day about Redox Active Molecules. It's that important. It's that important.
Darin, I know you're a busy man, but this is an important piece of the puzzle. Thanks for spending time here.
Thank you.
For anybody that's on the line today, just know this. We're ready to talk with you. We appreciate your time. Have a great growing season. Thanks, y'all.